Hey guys, we are going to talk about Chapter 7, the skeletal system today. We're going to start with the PowerPoint and then pretty quickly we will move over to a website that provides us with an anatomical model that we can look at when we're talking about these specific bones. So we'll start with the functions of the skeleton, 5 main functions. So we have support, giving us the ability to stand up. Really, everything in the body is supported by the skeletal system, the skin, the muscles, the organs within. Protection, if we look at or think about the rib cage and the cranium, protecting the lungs and then the brain respectively, that's where that protection component comes in. Movement is another function. So every muscle that goes over a joint is attached to the bone, and that's how we are able to move our body. So as those muscles contract, we're moving bones closer to each other, and that's what results in that flexion or as the muscles relax, the extension of our limbs. Storage, this is mostly concerning calcium storage, which occurs in the bones. And then the last function is hematopoiesis, which is the formation of red blood cells. And this is going to occur in the red bone marrow. 4 major bone types, according to the shape of the bone, is how they're categorized. So we have long bones, which are going to be the humerus, or the bone of the upper arm, the femur, or the thigh bone. Our short bones are going to be the carpals and the tarsals, so the bones of the wrists and the bones of the ankles. Flat bones are really flat in size, kind of self-explanatory with that one. That is going to be the sternum or the chest bone. Also, the bones of the skull are considered flat bones, and the ribs are flat bones. And then irregular bones are any bone that kind of has this weird shape. The most common example of those are the vertebrae. When we look at them on our model, you'll see that they kind of have this bizarre shape to them. That's what makes them an irregular bone. Some scientists will also recognize a round bone or a sesamoid bone category. Really, the example of this would be the patella or the kneecap. When we're looking at the structure of these long bones, so again, humerus or upper arm, femur or the thigh bone are examples of these long bones. They're broken up into several different areas. So the first one is the shaft of the bone or the diaphysis. So that's going to be this section right in here. Within that diaphysis, we have what's referred to as the medullary cavity or the medullary canal. And this is just a hollow open space within that shaft of the bone. Inside of that medullary cavity, we do have yellow bone marrow, which is a fatty form of bone marrow. The ends of the bones are going to be referred to as the epiphyses. So that's going to be these areas here. These are commonly covered in this articular cartilage up here. That is going to be what protects the 2 bones of a joint from rubbing against each other. The epiphyses is also made up of this spongy or cancellous bone. Inside of that is where we are going to see the red bone marrow. So keep in mind that's the area that's responsible for that red blood cell formation. Finally, the last component of the long bones are the 2 membranes. So if you look at the line that I made kind of around the medullary cavity, there's a membrane that covers that called the endosteum. Okay? So this is going to line the medullary cavity, The periosteum is going to line the outside of the bone everywhere that there is not articular cartilage. So as long as there's no articular cartilage on the area of the bone, there will be a periosteum that covers. Flat bones are composed a little differently. It's a spongy bone layer sandwiched between two compact bone layers. So we have our compact bone on the top and the bottom, and then that cancellous bone that sits in the middle. Looking at the microscopic structure of the bones, the cancellous or spongy bone results from a needle-like thread of bone called the trabeculae, which is surrounded by a network of open spaces. So these little areas here where those bones are meeting together, those are the trabeculae, and then there's all those open spaces within. This is found in the epiphyses of the bones, so the ends of the bones. And again, this is where the red bone marrow comes from, or is found. The compact bone, or that hardened bone that's at the diaphyses of the bone, or the shaft of the bone, is made up of a couple different areas. So we have the osteon, also called the Haversian system, which is the actual structural unit of the bone. Inside of that, we have the concentric lamella, which are rings of calcified matrix. So these make up the osteons. Then we have the central canal, also called the Haversian canal, which is in the center of that osteon, and the blood vessels run through there. And then we have transverse canals, or Volkmann canals, that connect to those central canals. So the blood supply of the multiple osteons found in the bones are connected through the transverse canals. The lacunae are going to be the spaces between the lamella, or those rings of calcified matrix that house the osteocytes. And then the canuliculi connect the lacunae with one another and with the central canal of the osteon. So that is going to provide a passage of nutrients from the blood vessels in the central canal to the osteocytes in the lacunae. So here's kind of a diagram depicting the compact bone. This is the part that gets a little bit confusing for people, is trying to figure out this whole system that goes along with this. So again, the osteon is going to be our structural unit. So all of these components are included within the osteon. It's made up of the concentric lamella, the central canal, transverse canals. All of those are inside of the osteon. So the concentric lamella are the rings of calcified matrix. So these rings here that kind of look like the rings of a tree are going to be the concentric lamella. And then in the middle here, we have the central canal, or the Haversian canal, which just contains blood vessels. We can't really see it in this picture, but then deep within here, we would have transverse canals, or Volkmann canals, that connect those central canals. So they're going to run from this central canal to the central canal of the next osteon. So this is where that blood supply runs or connects all of the osteons found within the bone. So here we have the cartilage tissue. So we've got the matrix here, which if we remember back to believe it was chapter 6 that it talked about the matrix. This is just the fluid surrounding the cells in a tissue. The cell type, or the main cell of cartilage, is going to be referred to as the chondrocyte. The matrix itself is gel-like and it lacks blood vessels. So this is why if the cartilage becomes damaged or worn out over time, it does not heal very well. There's really no blood vessels within that cartilage tissue, so it's very difficult for that tissue to regenerate or heal itself. So here we'll talk about bone development. So we have 3 different types of cells that play a role in this bone development: osteoblast, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. So the osteoclasts are responsible for dissolving the hard bone matrix. The osteoblasts are going to form the new bone matrix over the affected area. Once they harden, those osteoblasts become osteocytes. So this process can be a little bit confusing. Typically, we are going to see this when there's an injury or stress to the bone. So repetitive use, such as a runner, they're going to have stronger bones because of this process. As those kind of microscopic fractures occur from the kind of wear and tear, hard use of those bones, this process takes place and really hardens those bones so that they can withstand the pressure. This is also the process that helps form new bone over fracture lines if a bone is broken. So again, the osteoclast is going to dissolve the hard bone matrix. So that's just creating an opening so that the osteoblast can get in there, form a new bone matrix over the affected area, and then those osteoblasts harden and become osteocytes, which are the bone cells. There's also a process called endochondral ossification, and this is how bones are formed during developmental stages, so from fetus through just about puberty. The growth of bones from cartilage is what this process is referring to. So this is going to begin at the center of the bone and work its way out until all that's left is the epiphyseal plate. So a lot of people know the epiphyseal plate right here as the growth plate. So the process of that bone generation continues with bone growth occurring on either side of the epiphyseal plate, making those bones grow bigger, 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 and then eventually that plate or the cartilage within it hardens to form the epiphyseal line. So once that plate is gone and that cartilage has hardened to the bone or the epiphyseal line, a person won't grow anymore. That's about how big their bones are going to be. So this shows kind of the amount of bone versus cartilage that is found in a newborn. So you can see there's quite a bit of cartilage, and that's where that endochondral ossification will come into play to turn those cartilage areas into the hard bone. I think we'll switch over to our skeleton model at this point. All right, so we are going to talk about the kind of divisions of the skeletal system right now. So the skeleton is broken up into 2 different parts, the axial and the appendicular skeleton. So the axial is going to be the bones of the skull, spine, the chest, and then the hyoid bone, which is in the neck. The appendicular skeleton is the upper and lower extremities, including the girdles. So there's 2 different girdles that they're talking about. The shoulder girdle is going to include the scapula and the clavicle, along with the humerus. And then the pelvic girdle will include the entire pelvis, which is the ilium, pubis, and ischium. And then the femur, specifically that femoral head right there. So we'll start with the skull. Some of the bones that we'll see here. So we have the frontal, the sphenoid, which is kind of deep, you can see, the left temporal, the left parietal, the occipital, right parietal, right temporal, again that sphenoid. So one sphenoid, one frontal, one occipital, and then a right parietal and a left parietal, and a right temporal and left temporal. We also have the lacrimal, so left and right lacrimal, and then the ethmoid bone, which is deep in there too. The bones of the face, really what we'll focus on are just a couple of them. So we have the zygomatic, a right and a left, which are the cheekbones. Then we have the maxilla, or the upper jaw, and the mandible, which is the lower jaw. Then we have the hyoid bone, which is a little difficult to see, but it's this bone right here. So the hyoid is the only bone that does not form a joint with any other bones in the skeleton. So it serves as an anchor for the tongue and it helps support the larynx, but it does not form a joint. Next, we have the vertebral column, which is made up of those irregular bones that we talked about earlier. So separated into 5 different areas. We have the cervical, which is the neck, the thoracic, which makes up the thoracic cavity, so right behind the lungs, the lumbar, the sacrum, and then the coccyx down here. So with the cervical spine, we have the atlas, which is C1, and the axis, which is C2. So this joint is what allows the head to pivot, to kind of swing around from side to side. These are the only 2 components of the spine that have kind of alternative names. So the atlas is C1, axis is C2. The rest of the cervical spine is going to be C3, C4, C5, and C6. And C7, sorry. So there's C1 through C7. Then we are going to move into the thoracic vertebrae. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So these will be referred to as T1 through T12. So if somebody says pain in T3, you know that they're talking about the 3rd thoracic vertebrae. So again, 12 vertebrae within the thoracic spine. Then we move on to the lumbar spine. So L1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. There is a little bit of anatomical variance with this. Some people actually have a 6th lumbar spine or lumbar vertebrae. I'm not entirely sure why, but it's just kind of a commonly uncommon type thing. It's surprising how many people you'll see in the OR for instance, that have that 6th lumbar vertebrae. Then we have the sacrum, and then the coccyx down below. These two are fused, so you can see that there is a joint space in between the lumbar, in between the thoracic, but the sacrum is entirely fused and the coccyx is entirely fused. So now we'll get into the bones of the thorax. So we've got the clavicle or the collarbone here, one on either side. And then we have the ribs, numbers 1 through 12. So ribs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all attached to the sternum by costal cartilage. So that's the cartilage that runs from the bones of the rib to the bones of the sternum. Ribs 8, 9, and 10 are attached to the cartilage of the 7th rib. So you can see this is a little bit deceptive here because it looks like it is going to that sternum here, but really they're attached to the cartilage of the 7th rib. So ribs 1 through 7 are known as true ribs, while ribs 8 through 10 are your false ribs. And then you can kind of see them back here. We have ribs 11 and 12. These are not connected to any portion of the sternum or the cartilage of the above ribs. So these are known as your floating ribs. Here we'll look at the the bones of the arm. So here is the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. So the radius is attached to the side of the thumb, and then the ulna is on the side of the pinky. We are going to have the same setup over on the left side, so humerus, radius by the thumb, and then ulna by the pinky. So the bones of the hands are really broken up into 3 different areas. So we have the carpals right in here, the metacarpals, and then the phalanges. Okay? So proximal, middle, and distal phalanges. So these 3 bones here make up the phalanges. These are going to be the metacarpals, and then this section in here are the carpals. Now there are specific names for each of these bones. For our purposes, just know them as the carpals. Okay. You'll see the same on, oh, that's a little close up. You'll see the same on this side. So we have our carpals, metacarpals, and then the phalanges here. Proximal, distal, or excuse me, proximal, middle, and then distal phalanges. So now we will move to the joints of, or the bones of the leg. Let me get us in view here. All right, so we have the femur, which is that an example of a long bone, and then we have the tibia and the fibula. So the tibia is commonly known as the shin, and then the fibula lies on the side of that. And then we have our patella here, which some consider to be in that sesamoid bone category. So again, left side and right side. So here is the right femur, right tibia, and right fibula, right patella. The bones of the feet are, oops, let's see here. There we go. are going to be pretty similar to the bones of the hands, just a little different terminology. So we have the tarsals, metatarsals, and the phalanges here. So tarsals are going to be the bones of the ankles. Again, multiple names for these bones in here. For our purposes, they're just going to be tarsals. And here are the metatarsals, and then our phalanges. So proximal, middle, and then just a teeny tiny distal phalanx. That is going to be the bones of the body. So this example that they provide us here is an example of a male skeleton. Really what you're going to notice between female and male is that the male skeleton is a little bit larger, and the shape of the pelvis is going to be different. So males have a deep and narrow pelvis, while the females have broad and shallow. Main purpose of this is because the female body, of course, is responsible for carrying a fetus. So the shape of the pelvis, that broad and shallow, allows the female to carry the fetus and then is essential in the birthing process. So we'll talk about the different kind of joints real quick. So joints are also called articulations. It's going to be anywhere that two bones meet. So the best example is really, we'll talk about the elbow here. Okay, so this one we're pretty common with, pretty familiar with. We use this joint all the time. Every bone is going to have a joint except for the hyoid bone. So remember, that's the one in the throat, in the neck that anchors the tongue. So every other bone is going to connect to at least one other bone. So you can see in our example here, there's actually 3 bones that are connected here. So keep in mind, here's the diaphysis, and the epiphysis is going to be the end of that long bone, and that's where the articular cartilage is located, between those bones. So we have 3 different types of bones, of joints. The elbow joint is an example of a diarthritic joint. This means there's free movement. There's a lot of different types of movement allowed by the elbow. Some other examples of this are the knee, shoulder, and hip. So really anything that we can move in multiple ways. The amphiarthrotic joints are going to be joints that allow for slight movement. So this is cartilage connecting articulating bones. In between the pubis bones and then the vertebral joints here. So they just allow limited movement. We can't really move our spine in the way that we can move our elbow. It'd be a little weird if we could all whip our torsos around like we could our hands or whatever. So those are slight moving joints. And then synarthrosis are going to be joints where there is no movement. So fibrous connective tissue has grown between these joint surfaces. So the sutures of the skull are going to be the examples of our synarthritic joints. Okay, that is all that I have for you. This section of the book does also talk about different types of joint movements. There is a nice picture of these movements in your book on page 146. So normally, if we were in class together, I'd make everybody get up and do these actions. Since we are in the online version, feel free to kind of move through them at home just to get used to the different movements and what they mean. And then if you have any questions about anything, just let me know.